It's my honor today to moderate this important panel, and I do hope that we will have a lot of questions to my honorable speakers. So let me start from introducing them. First, of course, I'm starting from Ukraine, and Vadym Halaichuk, first deputy chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Ukraine's integration into the European Union, Verkhovna Rada, and I hope one day the committee will be changed because Ukraine will become a member of the EU. Oh yeah, so and we will ask Vadym when it will happen. So also it's my honor to introduce Zoltán Vajda, member of Parliament, National Assembly of Hungary. And thanks for visiting Ukraine, and I think it's really important that we have you. We wish to see much stronger relations with Hungary, but having you in your country, I think this is also a positive signal that the situation will be changing. And we have online also important speaker of today's panel, Adrian Balutel, Secretary of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and European Integration from Moldova, and it's also our honor to have you here today. And I hope that Paweł, Kowal, representatives of Sejm of the Republic of Poland will join us soon, and we will also have a perspective from Poland, because we are really very thankful to Poland for the hospitality, for strong supports in this challenging time of Russian genocide against Ukraine. So we will try to do our panel very dynamic. So now I'm kindly asking our speakers to answer on the question, European Caucus, troublemakers or troubleshooters? But very brief, so actually use your maximum 3 minutes to answer on this question, and also like your general position, because of course I want our panel to focus how Parliament or parliamentarians from the whole world could help Ukraine to defeat Russia quicker. So in Ukraine, everyone not just dreaming but fighting every day to see how we defeat Russia. So actually, Vadym, let's start from you. Troublemakers or troubleshooters?
Well, definitely in the situation we are troubleshooters and have been for some time. As those of you who have been following the issues that it didn't happen on 24th of February when Russia did what they did, and not just in terms of invading Ukraine, but openly attacking Europe, attacking European energy security. We've been talking about it. It's one of those where you say, hey, we told you so for many years when, for example, the Nord Stream 2 projects were discussed. Right away, we've seen, I mean, how couldn't you see it coming? So that was the troubleshooting role of Ukraine, and some of our neighbors. Poland had clearly seen the same risks. However, we were not hurt, and unfortunately the situation has deteriorated to what we have now in terms of total insecurity on energy issues, for example. So therefore, the troubleshooting efforts of Ukraine have been active for some time and not very effective for some time. But now we see the opportunity for Ukraine to become much more involved and much more effective, again, in troubleshooting on other issues, because there's still a lot in terms of what we need to do to reform how the European Union functions, European institutions function, how this whole enlargement process, because this is what it's all about, in fact, and we'll talk about it in a little more detail. So we already see Ukraine being instrumental to these issues, and of course our immediate members, our immediate neighbors and member states in the European Union are also taking more and more proactive position in defending their views on what European Union should look like. So here we are, let's join forces and change the European Union.
Thank you so much for your answer, very ambitious. So, Zoltán, what do you think? knowing your background and your experience in Hungary and also your colleagues in the European Parliament, what would be your answer?
I promise that I'll answer the question whether or not we are troublemakers or troubleshooters. I promise that I'll answer, but let me start with a couple of very personal comments. First, it's wonderful to be here amongst friends, and the topic of this conference is whether or not Ukraine is Central Europe or not. If you just walk around in this city, I arrived yesterday noontime and I had a couple of hours free time. If you just walk around in the city, you could be in Vienna or Budapest, so it is Central Europe. The only security concern that I've had ever since I've been here is having a little bit too much wine last night and the immense amount of wonderful, delicious meals that I've had. So that's the first comment I'd like to make. The other comment that I'd like to make is what all of my Hungarian colleagues so far have said today. They said that they are not representing the Hungarian government. By definition, I'm not representing the Hungarian government since I'm an opposition member of parliament. I also happen to be the chair of the budget committee, about which I'd like to make one comment in a moment. But besides not representing the government, I'm an individual winner, so I did win a caucus in the spring election. So I think I can say that at least in my electoral district, I'm representing the people. So to answer your question, whether or not we're troublemakers or troubleshooters, it depends who you're talking about. Our prime minister, he's a troublemaker. But we are not troublemakers, and the Hungarians are not troublemakers. The point I'd like to make is please do not identify our prime minister with my beloved country. To be honest, I'm really fed up in the sense that anywhere I travel, I have to explain this, but he doesn't represent us. He's the head of he's heading a huge propaganda machine with unlimited funds, but he doesn't represent the Hungarian people. If I can continue for a minute or more longer, I'd just like to say 3 macro data about Hungary, and trust me, I don't want a lecture on the macro situation of Hungary, but I have a point to make in a moment. Hungary at present has an inflation rate of around 20%, point number 1. Second, our exchange rate with the euro has depreciated about 50% in the past 10 years and has depreciated about 20% the past year and has depreciated a further 10% the past 3 months. It has actually increased a little bit the past few days. And the third point I'd like to make, and I'll tell you why I'm making these points, is that our central bank base interest rate is now, well, officially 13, but in effect, it's 18%. Why am I making these points? Well, our inflation, our government, the prime minister calls it a war inflation. This by fact cannot be true because inflation started to increase drastically second half of last year when there was no war. The second, by definition, our depreciation of the currency cannot be a result of the war, because, say, Czechia or the Polish currency has stayed stable, so it cannot be a result of that. And the third point is our base interest rate. It's 6.75 in Poland, 7% in Czechia, it's 18% for us. So again, this cannot be a result of the war. If you're an authoritarian, I'm hesitant to use the word dictator for our prime minister, but if you're an authoritarian leader, then you always try to find somebody to blame it on. Ever since he's been in power for the past 12 years, he's blamed it on the IMF, he's blamed it on civil societies, he's blamed migrants and refugees, he's blamed Muslims, he's blamed members of the LGBTQ community. In general, he's blamed the West. In general, he's blamed the US. And now, of course, he's blaming the European Union and Brussels. He says nothing is his fault, it's somebody else to blame it on. And at this point, I'd like to show what I showed you before. There's a poster on billboards going around in Hungary. Everywhere, thousands of these billboards, which I'd like to show to all of you. And I see that it's on this slide there. This is these billboards. These are these huge billboards that you see everywhere. Thousands of these billboards have shown up in Hungary. That says, I just translate, but I think it's pretty easy to understand. It says that Brussels sanctions are destroying us, and the sanctions are represented by a bomb. I'm in a country that's effectively being bombed, and I'm ashamed as a Hungarian that we have these billboards there that are representing sanctions as bombs. Please accept my apology on behalf of my prime minister. Well, it's not my prime minister, but it's the country's prime minister. So that's the first point I'd like to make, and then I carry on whenever you give me a chance.
Zoltán, thanks a lot for your honest position and visiting Lviv, Ukraine, and I also, just for your information, visited Budapest in September, participated in a forum on local communities organized by your mayor. And what I also learned that we have to strengthen our ties and working with cities to cities partnership and to work with your people. I agree that Orban is not the whole country, Hungarians, and we have to invest more efforts to explain and to continue our good neighborhood policy, even if your prime minister was one who blocked sanctions against Kirill, so-called Orthodox Church and others, and which is really sad, and many others like in energy embargo. And thanks for your position and your party. So let me continue, Paweł. We are happy to see you. You're joining our discussion. So the first question we ask to our speakers, members of parliament and parliaments are troublemakers or troubleshooters? So you have your 3 minutes at the beginning.
3
before.
minutes, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. 3 minutes about parliamentary role towards a conflict, yeah, towards a war.
Ask 1 minute. Troublemakers or troubleshooters?
Okay. I think from my personal experience, we have in fact two platforms. The first platform is relations with government, with ministers, and it's our role is making pressure for the solutions and the new steps and the more brave steps, etc., etc. And second one, our mission as the parliamentarians. We are elected, we are a special mandate, we have a special duty. We have special duties. Which type of duties? First, it's from my point of view, really important, personal testimony. I think that the role of parliamentarians in the Central Europe now is to visit Ukraine, to visit that type of place like Bucha, like Irpin, and to give to our electorate, to the people, very personal testimony. Second one, to condemn in any possibilities in parliamentary work, in interparliamentary contacts, and in public life, in interviews, etc., etc., to condemn aggression, to underline the role of international law, to condemn in that context, I mean, Russian war against Ukraine, to condemn a Russian aggression. I have, generally speaking, I have, you know, we started the discussion during the last conference of Warsaw Security Forum in Warsaw a few months ago. We discussed more deeply about our role as a parliamentarians in context of war, and my idea is to establish a league of parliamentarians, maybe Central European, maybe European, pan-European league parliamentarians of parliamentarians against war. And I think that we should prepare kind of instruction, kind of parliamentary code, how to manage our work in context of war. Let's summarize. We should constantly underline the importance of democracy, to be strongly against autocracy, because the real roots of current situation is autocracy in Russia. It could be impossible in normal democratic circumstances. The second one is to focus on the personal example of and personal position, to help refugees, to help people, to be personally engaged. In our time, in our epoch, I think that personal example, personal signal, it's especially important. We should we have a special type of mission. I think that we have a special type of mission to inform another members of parliaments. It's very practical, because many parliamentarians think I cannot to go at the moment to Ukraine. Ukraine is a country in the world. For many parliamentarians, for many my colleagues, it's from the West, it's problematic to go to Przemysl, Rzeszów or Krakow, because they know from they know that many people cancelled last few months reservation in hotels in Krakow, in Rzeszów, in I don't know, maybe also in Warsaw, and they think it's it could be very difficult. It could be unsafe, and we should give as a parliamentarians our personal testimony, information, engage, invite to Ukraine to see situation on the ground, and we should be in contact with Ukrainian parliamentarians. In the first months after that Russian re-aggression, after February, I saw how important it's personal contact with parliamentarians to give to our Ukrainian colleagues support, to offer support also for families, also for co-workers, and to be open for a lot of political initiatives, to be open for the everyday work, not in the normal parliamentary as we say tradition or typical not in the line of typical parliamentary work. To be open to work every day, every weekend, to be open to organize common visits in the West, to be open to inform also parliamentarians about the situation, parliamentarians in Germany, French, Netherlands, etc.
Thank you, Paweł. Just can I say one secret? How I met you after the full-scale escalation. The first time. It was at the Ukraine-Polish border when Paweł was checking, like inspecting how Ukrainians are being received and if local authorities in Poland are really providing good service to Ukrainians.
We have met, but remember, close to Lubacz, yeah?
Yes, yes. So this was really important, and then we convinced Paweł also to go with Ukrainian delegation to Washington, just to explain that the victory of Ukraine is crucially important geopolitically for the whole planet, but also for Poland, and Poland should give us more MiG, Su-27 tanks and everything. So this was a lot of behind public.
But we met with Hanna on the Polish-Ukrainian border close to Lubacz and spent dinner in the home of Polish Catholic priest who was informal chief of help for Ukrainians in that region.
Yeah, so thank you, Paweł, for your work, for helping Ukraine to win. And now I would like to give the floor to Adrian Balutel from Moldova. Adrian, so for you, good evening, for you, so troublemakers or troubleshooters? Or you have your, like, invented your view on this issue?
Look, definitely troubleshooters, because we might first of all, regarding the country's position of Central Europe on Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, on our future perspective, there have been errors of judgment, and professionals, think tanks write a lot about that. But even before the war started, Central Europe supported a lot our region, especially Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. And Central European countries have and had and have a lot of support for the European path of our region, and both of our countries, in this case, Moldova and Ukraine. And this echoes a lot with the parliamentarians' work, because I want to remind you that when Moldova and Ukraine applied for the candidacy status to the European Union, the debates were going up until the last week before the Council. And the decision was not pinpointed and was not clear up until the last moment. And in this case, despite all the differences, the voices of the parliamentarians in Central European countries were crucial in advancing and promoting the idea to the countries that were less supportive of offering the candidate status. It made a huge difference. And the fact that Moldova could rely a lot on Romania and Ukraine could rely a lot on Poland, and generally Central Europe was, in most of the cases, was very in favor of offering the candidate status, helped a lot. And that, of course, has its root in the parliamentary majority, or more to say, a parliamentary consensus on the European perspective of Moldova and Ukraine and Georgia that is applicable, and this is applicable for most of the Central European countries. So definitely a troubleshooters. This also applies when it comes now with the support for Ukraine to win the war. We see that one of the most active countries are countries of Central Europe, actually. Also Baltic countries, if we might include them as well. So parliamentarians' work now is essential to make sure two things. First of all, that people would not enter in what is called now war fatigue. So parliamentarians have an important element, an important role to explain to the citizens of their country why it's important to keep up and why Ukraine is now providing security for all of us. And second, it's important to have as close connection as possible with the parliamentarians and parliamentary group at very different levels from Central Europe in order to continue advancing our European agenda together, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. It's extremely important now, especially for Moldova and Ukraine, to obtain the opening of the negotiation. And the core role of that lies in the parliamentary work, in us advocating as much as possible to our colleagues in Central Europe, in European Union in general, but I'd like to stress Central Europe now, to explain them, to show them the commitments we have, the progress we make in case of Ukraine, the sacrifices the Ukrainians are making in order to achieve this European path. So the parliamentary cooperation was crucial, is crucial, and will be crucial on making sure the governments do not fall into a bureaucratic trap, do not fall into a procedural fatigues, and that the value-based political agenda is being pushed on. So yeah, I'll go with the troubleshooters, despite all the problems and all the difficulties and some of the differences that might occur in the parliamentary majorities or parliamentary groups around the Central European region. Yeah, if there are any questions I'd like to contribute, please call me in.
Thanks a lot for your answer. And within almost 9 months after the full-scale escalation, we've seen a lot how parliaments lead in recognition Russian aggression as a genocide. Also designating Russian regime as a terroristic one. Also, we've seen example when yes, special tribunal also position, calling on more and tougher sanctions. Also, we've seen the debates between State Department and US Congress, Speaker Pelosi demanding to label Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, and the visit of Pelosi to Taiwan also. So we've seen a lot of examples when MPs elected by peoples, they are more proactively defending democracy, justice, and I think it's really important. But winter is coming, and Russian strategy is to freeze Ukrainians by deliberately attacking critical infrastructure and freezing millions of Ukrainians. And what is the role of interparliamentary cooperation to keep the level of support of your people, nations, at the same level of support that government of Central European countries and wider? will stick to their promises to help Ukraine to defeat Russia and not to push to peace or negotiation talks, because I think it's crucially important that this time Ukraine win, but it's not just full restoration of territorial integrity and sovereignty, it's also not just defeat of totalitarian regime, but it's also a defeat of Russian imperialism. So let me start probably from Hungary this time, because your case, your situation is compared to Poland and Moldova is more complicated. So actually, what are the challenges for you to convince your government, and what should be done from our side just to see more support from Central Europe to Ukraine? And I would extend to more global. I just came from Taiwan and the Republic of Korea, where you understand how really important victory of Ukraine for different part of the world. It's not just about Central Europe. So Zoltán, please.
Thank you. So I'd like to carry on in the way that I'd like to say how the government's actions and the Prime Minister's actions do not represent the will of Hungarians. And I'd like to give 5 very concrete examples of where the Prime Minister is a troublemaker. And then I'd like to give a couple of examples how we, opposition MPs, and the Hungarian population are troubleshooters in support of this wonderful country of Ukraine. Let me give 5 examples where Orbán, the Prime Minister, is a troublemaker. First of all, I think we are probably the only country in the EU where the number of Russian diplomats has increased in the past and not decreased. We have this so-called International Investment Bank, this Russian spy bank, I don't know how else to call it. The Russian spy bank is in Budapest. It's in the most prestigious location in the center of Budapest, and it hasn't been expelled. It has such a special diplomatic status that it is allowed to issue diplomatic immunity to basically whoever they want. And we're a Schengen country, so whoever comes to Budapest can go anywhere in the European Union. The first point I'd like to make is how Orbán is a troublemaker in this respect. The second is a fairly recent phenomenon. Over the weekend, the war criminal Putin was mentioning that maybe the Czech Republic, Poland, or Hungary might have territorial demands against Ukraine. The Czechs and the Polish were very, very fast in saying that that's stupid. I don't know what else word to use. I'm sure I should use a politically more correct term. Our government took a few days, and I think today there was a mention that that's not the answer. Again, it's a question of timing, bad way. The third one, our Prime Minister has repeatedly said that the energy crisis that is happening, of course, in your country to a much more serious degree, but in our countries and many of the European Union countries, he's plainly said that this is not the effect of Putin's games, but is because of the ill-fated sanctions of the European Union, when we must know clearly that there's no energy sanctions. So it's plain lie. Third point. The fourth one, allow me to say this is a fairly recent one as well. As I'm sure all of you know, or I would hope many of you know, we had a similar type of revolution against the Russian imperialists in 1956. October 23rd of every year is a special national holiday for us, when we had a revolution against Russians, which was crushed on the 4th of November, which was celebrated, well, not celebrated, but on the memory of that was 3 days ago. Our Prime Minister had a Twitter message, which I have it written in front of me. I'd like to read it, so it's verbatim exactly what he said. Again, on the day where we remember when Russians crushed our revolution. His Twitter message said that today is National Day of Mourning. They crushed our revolution in 1956, but our love for freedom and sovereignty lives on to this day. Our Prime Minister was not able to say the word Moscow or Russia or whatever. He used the word they, where they came from Moscow. And the fifth point I'd like to make was about this poster which I showed before this billboard. Of course, first of all, the billboard itself is shocking because it shows bombs neighboring a country where real bombs are being dropped. But it's even more shocking because this is against, as he calls it, the mistaken Brussels sanctions. Why this is very serious is because, of course, these sanctions will have to be voted on again sometime early next year. besides having these billboards everywhere in the country, he has started, by he I mean the Prime Minister, which equals the government, which equals the leading party, has started, well, a so-called national referendum. It's not an official referendum, he calls it a consultation. Each and every person has received in the post a consultation letter with awfully crazy, misguided questions, trying to gather support to somehow veto this new line of, or the sanctions sometime next year. Of course, he has voted on agreeing to each and every line of sanctions in Brussels, but then he says, it's the Brussels sanctions. So what I'm terrified of is that in his eternal quest of fighting against the European Union, of course, we are expecting the money to come from the European Union, but he's fighting against the European Union. He's trying to somehow gather momentum to blackmail the EU into this with the sanctions. And the last point I'd like to make is about the NATO membership of Sweden and Finland. Of course, every NATO member's parliament has to vote on the ratification of this. There are 2 NATO members that have so far not ratified this. One of them is Turkey. And do you know which one the other one is? It's my parliament. It's Hungarian parliament. And this is where I'd like to move on to what we can do as MPs. This has been in front of Parliament for 5 or 6 weeks now, this very simple voting on ratifying it. As an opposition member of Parliament, I've numerous times seen examples where laws which are important for the government are submitted to Parliament on Sunday night, a few minutes before midnight, so it's still Sunday, and they're debated on Tuesday, and they're voted on by Wednesday. So in 2 or 3 days, laws are passed when they're important for the government. This particular law, which is just a simple vote, they officially said that the Parliament is overburdened with other tasks. That is why we do not have time. So one thing we can do is that every Monday, we submit, well, it's a resolution type of thing, where we want this to be passed. And every week they say that we are overburdened, and later on we will. It's really, 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 really crazy. The last point I'd like to make, if I can have one more thing, is that the Hungarians and the Hungarian people are troubleshooters. I'm sorry, yes, are troubleshooters. Yes, the government is a troublemaker, we're troubleshooter. Please don't identify us with our government. I'm sure that we have differences, political differences, with Ukraine and Hungary. For example, let's say occasionally the questionable treatment of the Hungarian minorities in eastern Ukraine. But when you're at war, differences like this are negligible. Once everything is finished, we can debate this. The Hungarian people are friends of Ukraine. And I'd like to give 3 examples to prove that we are. About 1.3 million refugees have come over the border to Hungary. Many of them have, the vast majority of them have gone over to other countries. The Hungarian civil society has been the first one to step in and help with any way that they can. If I could just have one personal comment. On February 26th, so this Saturday, 2 days after the brutal invasion, we were in an election campaign. We had elections in spring, and I regularly had my election stances on the market on Saturday mornings. The Friday before this Saturday market, 1 day after the invasion, I just posted on Facebook that I'll be there during my regular election times, and if anybody wants to bring any donations, I'm happy to take it to the border on that day. I thought initially that the amount of stuff that would be collected, they would fit in our family car. By early morning of Saturday, I saw immediately that the amount of donations coming, and this is just one electoral district, wouldn't fit in my car. So we immediately had to find a minivan, and eventually 2 full truckloads of donations were able to take on that Saturday immediately to the border. And the Hungarians were so happy to help in any way that they can. So that's the point I'd like to make, that we are friends and we are all Central Europeans in that sense.
Thanks a lot, but I have very small questions. Who sponsored these billboards?
Yes.
Is it Hungarian taxpayers or is it Russian sponsor?
No, well, yes. The second comment is, well, implicitly, I guess we are. To be very honest, and this is an honest comment, I'm really not sure of the motivations of the Prime Minister, because rationally, yes, those billboards, it's so difficult to see them. It's everywhere in my country. I'm really not sure of the motivations of the Prime Minister, because once again, Hungary, led by him, will be on the wrong side of history. So many times in our tragic past, Hungary has been on the wrong side of history. Why he's guiding us to be there, I cannot politically see why he would do it. Having other motives, like what you just mentioned, of course, I'm hesitant to say it out loud, but it could be that. Well, and to answer your question, how those are funded by taxpayers' money. These are officially government posters, and of course the government is funded by Hungarian taxpayers. I'm sure this is the worthwhile way to spend our money in such a difficult economic situation. But it's not just the billboards, it's this whole national consultation powered by an everlasting financed propaganda machine, both at a local level and national level, trying to change the attitude of the people. But I'm happy to say that it isn't happening. We see, the Hungarians see exactly what is going on.
Thank you so much. I think that taxpayers should know how their money are being spent. So, Paweł, how do you see the challenges for interparliamentary cooperation, or challenges, I hope you don't have such challenges inside Poland?
In fact, Putin's plan for this winter, which is coming, is really clear. Putin wanted to create energy crisis, after provoke social crisis on that base, and transform social crisis into a political crisis. And he has real effective tools on the West. It's the parties of Putin turn, like Berlusconi, for example, or Le Pen. And they were ready to try to strengthening that political crisis, to promote, as we say, peace parties in the West. Putin tried to play with Western pacifism, and on the end of the day, or on the end of the winter, to change position of governments. Because plan is clear, to change position of mainstream parties in the West, and to weakening the support for that parties in Western societies. And our first duty is inform about Putin's plan. Openly say that this is a challenge for the West this winter, to understand the type of policy, to not only interest every day on the morning about possible nuclear attack, but to be more careful about Western societies and processes which will provoked by Putin and Putin's party. I think that we, without any problem, can say that we have the same situation like Comintern. We have, in fact, Putin-turn parties in the practically with the same function like in the history, like Comintern. And they will use that party to try to transform that energy and social crisis into serious political crisis. And we should inform. We should give our testimony. We should try to propose as a parliamentarians. We can more than governments, in fact. And I would like to underline your thesis that our role in parliaments is to not only speak about Putin's policy. We are not only researchers, we are politicians, and we should be more offensive. Propose to establish a special tribunal, special court, to be offensive, to demonstrate that we understand Putin's policy, and that we understand that forthcoming few months may be key months, key time, key period in current Putin's operation.
Thank you, Paweł. And you remind me about the Warsaw Security Forum. and where the First Lady of Ukraine took part, and it was really received the Night of Freedom Award, and it was really very thankful also for this event. And during the Warsaw Security Forum, there were several experts saying that Crimea is an achievable goal for next year. So I do pray and believe that our armed forces will liberate Kherson, and thanks our parliaments from Central Europe and others for supporting with weapons, with sanctions, and being with Ukraine for all this time, which is really important. So I have a question to Adrian Balutel. Can we imagine, Adrian, that Crimea is an achievable goal next year? Ukraine defeating Russia opens an opportunity for Moldova. How do you see this opportunity? And it's not just about membership in the EU after the candidate status you mentioned.
We all hope that Ukrainian victory over Russian aggression will open an important opportunity to solve Transnistrian conflict. That is a primary opportunity we are looking for. Transnistrian region poses danger and a security risk both for Moldova and Ukraine. It posed a security risk before the start of the war, and hopefully the end of the war and the win of Ukraine will echo with the possibility to solve the conflict in a peaceful manner. We already now see that so-called authorities in Transnistrian region are very cooperative. Moldova now is the single source of any logistical supply to the Transnistrian region. We see that Russia now is punishing even the Transnistrian region by cutting the gas to them primarily because they failed to, how to say it in English, to hit the situation. So we saw in the beginning of the war that Transnistrian region was source of some efforts to destabilize that failed. And we see that apparently Russia is very mad with the Transnistrian so-called leadership. And hopefully that is a window of opportunity for us to advance with the solving the Transnistrian conflict. And that is the single most important security element from the Moldovan perspective that will open up an opportunity after or when Ukraine wins the war. And we are quite sure that it is going to happen. On our side, we now work on having as many windows and many channels of communication with the Transnistrian region open as possible in order to ensure that Transnistria does not pose a risk both for Moldova and Ukraine, and that the situation is being maintained stable and secure. What I wanted to add, if I may, if I have a minute, on challenges of the parliamentary cooperation in the current setting, they are very much connected to the fact that the governmental officials within the crises that we face very often does not have time, and that's both on both sides, on EU side, on our side, to look into specific details in the context of how things are happening in our countries. And the aim and the challenge of the parliamentary cooperation is to deliver the technicalities, if I may, the specific context of why things are happening the way they happen in our countries. And it may be achieved through closer and more integrated parliamentary cooperation. We need to emphasize more these parliamentary groups of friendship between our countries and the countries of the European Union and the parliaments of the member states. We need new platforms. We need a much more energized use of the existing multilateral frameworks like Euronest, for example, which are of key importance to explain in a much more detailed manner why and how things are happening in our countries. Because at the governmental level, very often, due to the rush of things, due to the numerous things that a government is supposed to handle, some minor details, but important one may fail to be taken into consideration. While members of the parliament have the luxury of this availability of space and time to look into the context, into detail, to know people that are not mandatory at the forefront, but play an important role in advancing things in their country. So the challenge of the parliamentary cooperation is to look in much more detail, to understand the context of how things are happening, and to spread the news if that might affect the policy making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. We have 10 minutes left, and I want the audience to ask questions. But before, also, Vadym, Ukrainian Parliament, Verkhovna Rada, I really was applauding when you adopted several important resolutions. After appeal of Ukrainian president to indigenous people of Russian Federation, and also then Parliament followed by adopting several resolutions. One of the resolutions was non-recognition of occupation of Chechen Republic, and you recognize as a genocide what happened with Chechnya. Also, there was another appeal or statement of Ukrainian Parliament on de-imperialization of Russia and decolonization of indigenous people, and also their right for self-determination, like Chechen Republic did after the Soviet Union was disintegrated. And also, what was really very strong, this is also your recognition of northern territories as a part of Japan. So can you explain me how you gonna to, after such a strong position, how to say, take on board countries from Central Europe and to convince US, European Parliament and others that they should follow your position on de-imperialization of Russia? Because there are many statements and Russian so-called opposition trying to convince that with the regime change, we will build democratic Russia. We were trying for centuries, from Peter the Great, who has stolen the name of Rus, renaming Moscovia, Muscovy, then Soviet Union, now Russian Federation. So we Ukrainians do not believe in democratic Russia after regime change. But Ukrainian Parliament has official position, president position. It seems like now it's a state policy. So on sanctions, it's easy to convince MPs to support. On recognition Russian aggression as a genocide, also. On tribunal, also. But with de-imperialization of Russia, when US and the EU, it seems like lacking of proper strategy on Russian Federation. And the delay with weapons supply is also one of the reasons, the lack of strategy.
Well, thank you, Hanna, for your high remarks to Verkhovna Rada. The reason is that the full invasion on February 24 has changed Ukrainian politics deeply, and has changed the role that Ukrainian diplomacy is playing in the world, I'd say. We have, in order to survive, we have to be a lot more active. In order to win this war, it's not enough anymore just to follow your regular diplomatic channels of communication and your regular instruments that you have. You have to be a lot more creative and a lot more proactive and a lot more strict and demanding from your partners. So that's what we have become as a country, as the government, and as a parliament too. Hanna, you mentioned that it's easier to get unanimous vote on sanctions. Not that easy again, and here we actually have a very good setup on the stage. We have two spectrums of how countries have taken the sanctions. We have Poland, where pretty much everything was voted very, very quickly, and you have Hungary, where not that much progress was made, although it's quite serious given the position. However, if you think about the effectiveness of Russian propaganda, and again here I completely agree with you, Zoltán, that's what happened. If you look at the economies, for example, in Poland and in Hungary, Polish economy probably depended more on Russian money and had to lose more from sanctions, especially those applied to Russian businessmen, to Russian companies, and so on and so forth. There are not that many companies in Hungary. There are not that many, if any, Russian oligarchs who actually moved to Hungary and took their money with them. So it's another thing, but it just shows you how important it is to speak and to be very active in explaining what's really happening. With the Crimean platform, we remember last year when the first Crimean platform took place, the discussion, the goal of the whole summit last year was quite honestly, to bring back the issue of Crimea, because the issue was fading away. People were getting sort of used to, hey, yes, Crimea illegally occupied, but it's what do we do with it now? Let's get serious. Russia is there, and it might be there for long. Let's look for some instruments, but there was always this but. So the president of Ukraine says we cannot have that situation. Let's think what we can do to remind people that Crimea is Ukraine, and it's not acceptable that it's sort of fading away, going away. And if those of you who have followed the summit of last year remember that the discussions during the summit and the final documents were all about diplomatic instruments that need to be used to liberate Crimea sometime in the future. Well, the situation changed completely and very drastically after February 24. Crimea is just the same occupied territory of Ukraine and will be dealt with accordingly. And nobody questions the right of Ukraine to use, for example, military instruments to liberate Crimea and to deoccupy the territories and reconcile Crimea with the rest of Ukraine. But here we took a step forward, and this year we had the first inaugural summit of Crimean platform, the parliamentary dimension, and that was the major theme. That look, Crimea is much bigger than the island, the semi-island, than the Russian-Ukraine war. It's about Russia, the empire, or the diminishing empire that did it to many people all around the world. And therefore, we need to make sure that we unite and develop the mechanism that the whole world, democratic world, reacts to something like that, where a country just goes off and occupies the neighboring country's territories, claiming that it's theirs because they have some sort of vote. So it's not just about Crimea, it's about the northern territories. It's about occupied territories in Moldova, in Georgia. It's been pretty effective in terms of, again, not just bringing attention back to Crimea, and it's awful what's happening there, but also hitting on this particular notion. Until we get very serious about changing this mindset of Russians that they are an empire and therefore they can do whatever they pleased and you're going to have to live with it, it would be very difficult to achieve the results that we aiming at, which is peace and new arrangements, security arrangements in Europe. We have to de-imperialize Russia. We have to deoccupy all the territories that are taken illegally by Russia, to bring it back in terms with the reality. They're not an empire, and the world has the instruments, and the world has the will, the political will, and it's up to the parliaments. We are the most effective, I would say, in terms of being able to go out there to our voters, to explain, to gather that support, because that's where the political pressure arises, and that's when the governments around the world begin to act, when they do feel the pressure from their people, from the electorates. That's where we see our role, and that's where we what we had in mind when we made all those decisions in Parliament.
Thank you so much. So every inch of Ukrainian territory should be free from occupiers. And if someone said the biggest geopolitical catastrophe was the Soviet Union collapse, so we could say the biggest geopolitical success will be happening when disintegration of the prison of nations will happen with the defeat. Maxim Yakovlev, I saw your hand, so please ask your question. And who else, please? We have four questions, but since we started late, so let's continue our discussion, because it seems like there are many hands and many well-known experts, and I want to hear all the questions, please.
Thank you, Hanna. Anyway, I think we can catch the bus to the restaurant afterwards, so we have the continue. Yes, exactly. So before I start, Mr. Vajda, köszönöm szépen. It was very nice to hear a different Hungary, and before all the witnesses, I invite you to speak to my students at Kyiv Mohila Academy, which I represent here, so that would be very nice. I have a brief question because...
By the way, so
Sorry?
I'm a teacher. Yes.
Wonderful, you see, so I take it as a yes in front of the witnesses, so agreed. Okay, I have a question because since I represent both university and university-affiliated think tank, and I always hear from many of my foreign colleagues that Ukraine, we need to provide information to our foreign partners. So you as members of parliaments, and this is to all of you, what type of information, is any, you would need? What type of analytics or information from Ukraine you would need to talk to your voters in your constituencies, to a member of parliament? How can we on Ukrainian side effectively work with like MPs like you who support Ukraine in your countries, and in what format we could establish that cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then Serhiy Sidorenko. No, let's first, 4 questions I'm writing down, not to forget, and then Serhiy, please, go ahead.
Yeah, Sergei Sidorenko, European Pravda. So, as a journalist focusing on Hungarian affairs from time to time, yeah, I'm here. I'm obliged to ask you, reflecting to your messages, which I'm really thankful for. You say that we have to make a difference between urban and current authorities and Hungarian people. But what can we do with public surveys showing that quite a large majority, or at least large part, of Hungarian population do support the government position about that Ukraine is probably guilty in war, that Russia is not an aggressor, and all this bullshit, sorry.
Very diplomatically, Serhiy. So, the third question, I saw the hand okay, please, and then from that.
Hello, my name is Andrei. We was talking about the Kherson. I am from Kherson. Spent 1.5 months in occupation, but the question I have in another direction. I am a seaman with 15 years experience, and we have a big painful problem before the war, because we couldn't make our diploma and certification due to the corruption in the, let's say, government. And till now it's the big problem, because the second one, the seamen cannot go through the border, and we bring to our budget every year around $3 billion to economy. So the first question, the law is not working. What to do in Ukraine? And let's say how to explain to our government that the seamen can also bring our flag in the world, because we are taking 5th place in the world of the officers in the market, and our place now taking the Russian seamen. So 2 questions. If the law is not working, what to do? Because let's say you are the parliament, give us some answer, and how to explain to the government importance of the seamen. Thanks.
Thank you. Vadym will be responsible for everything, not just responding the question. And please.
Thank you. Wojciech Przybylski, Visegrad Insight. I have the question related to the data that supports the Hungarian society. I want to believe you in, and I want to believe in Hungarian society, but I do not find supporting data really that would say that Hungarian society is in fact following what you said. Neither in the recent elections, nor in the Globsec opinion poll, where Hungarian society in minority attributed the fault, the responsibility for the war to Russia, which was I think 48%. And there were even further more worrying opinion poll reports that show Hungarians seem to be ascribing the fault, and they attribute the fault of, to whoever else, including NATO. And of course, we can say this is because Orban owns and uses the public money for the propaganda you've been showing. The Russian operatives do not need to operate in Hungary because Hungarian public TV does it for them. So you can have all this, but how do you change the society? What's the plan of the opposition to change the society? Because you will need to change the society in order to deliver your promises from this panel.
Thank you so much. Very, very important questions. So no more questions in the audience. Are you already preparing for dinner? Okay, so we have 4 questions. I think let's start from our Hungarian friend. So you have almost 3 questions to you. If you could answer like short, because I want also Vadym answer and final short remarks from Poland and Moldova.
Well, thank you for the questions. I try to answer them as in concrete terms as I can. How do we change society? For example, I'm here. Of course, I think that's. Of course, I'm not trying to be unmodest. I'm trying to have a blue shirt and a yellow tie as many times as I can, and people have seen that. And how do we? And the numbers that you were looking for. Again, without trying to pretend that I'm immodest, I did win. So I did beat a guy who was a Fidesz guy who was in the party, which is a pro-Orban party. So when they say that I'm not representing the people, well, I say I have the clearest mandate because people voted for me. But obviously, and I agree with Sergi's comment as well, that there's this immensely strong propaganda machine that we're fighting against. A propaganda machine which, as you said, is now becoming clearly pro-Russian. I mean, I see sentences on state TV, or I hear sentences on the state-sponsored TV, the propaganda TV, or on websites, or even in the local state-sponsored newspapers, which are so clearly pro-Russian that it's really, really mind-boggling. So to fight a propaganda machine, which is first at a state level, because national TV networks are propaganda machines, but even more powerfully at a local level, local governments have local newspapers and local media outlets that are shooting with this propaganda. It's a lopsided war in the sense that they have unlimited funds, and literally unlimited funds, and their level of things that they can say, there's no discrepancy in that. That poster, the reason I wanted to show this poster is so you see that they have no scrupulous in what they show. However, please believe me that people still voted for me and for others who were in the opposition and who did win. In terms of Maxim's question, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'd be happy to come. When I introduce myself, today I forgot to say that, but I always have this sentence that I don't fear that I'm a politician, even though I'm a member of parliament and the chair of the budget committee. At any time when they ask me to introduce myself, I say that I'm a teacher. Because I'm a very proud graduate of CEU, the Central European University, founded by George Soros. So of course I'm labeled as a traitor of the people, because if I'm a graduate of the university, then I'm in George Soros's army, and this is what they actually say in the parliament against me. I'm very proud to be a graduate of that, and I teach at International Business School in Budapest 2 full days every Thursday and Friday. I'm a full-time teacher. I have 11 hours a week that I teach economics. The reason I say this because I always tell my friends that I'm a teacher first, and I have this perverse hobby of being a politician second. And to answer a question of what information we would need, it's difficult because when Orban is talking about that the only solution to our economic problems, the ones I listed at the beginning, are peace, that peace must come. Of course, I agree with this sentence. But when he's talking about peace, he's saying that any arms shipments, any support for Ukraine, he says this, is just prolonging the war, is just extending the war. It's very difficult to fight sentences like this because, of course, all of us as human beings, we're pro-peace. Nobody likes war. But when he's talking about peace, he says that there should be an immediate ceasefire and everything should stop like this. And then we try to explain, we, myself, and those of us in the opposition, that if Russia were to stop the military actions, then war would finish. If Ukraine would stop defending itself, then Ukraine is finished. So that's the sentences that we try to say. But of course, simplistic propaganda sentences about peace, things like that, they're difficult to fight. But I still have a strong belief in the Hungarian people. We are pro-Europe. We have our experience with Russia. The example I said with the revolution, we have our experiences. I don't think with unlimited funds, with the propaganda, he will be able to change that belief, but he's trying. He's trying. I think I tried to answer.
Thanks so much. I think answering your questions, we also have to show more movies from occupied territories like Izum, bringing also Ukrainians after captivity, that they have to tell their stories of nightmare of being captured, and actually explain this to Hungarians about genocide, which is happening in 21st century. So Vadym.
Very, very quick, actually, answer. The best way to fight corruption in Ukraine would be to move quickly in adopting European legislation, European acquis, which we are doing now quite successfully. There are special requirements as to how corruption is fought in Ukraine, and also the government's been pretty active. In the last few years and in the last few months, as a matter of fact, that's also been the focus of attention since the conditions, recommendations, that's what they were called, of the European Commission, while granting the candidacy status, was pay special attention, and there are very concrete recommendations towards the corruption issue. The sailors issue, there we had two sorts of problems: the legislation, or rather the norms that regulated the whole process of certification, and how that process was abused by local authorities. So that's been changed, as far as I know, and the procedure have become a lot more transparent. Though I see you nodding no. Unfortunately, I guess we will have to return to that. The other part of that problem was also the willingness of those affected to be witnesses, to be the whistleblowers. It also has to deal a little with the legislation, but I remember the law enforcement officials, when we made the inquiries, the law enforcement officials complained that, hey, we have plenty of people who are willing to tell us their stories of how much and who they had to pay, but when we asked them to file official complaints, to wear the wire, go in there, give the bribe, and make our job easier that way, most people said no. It's a pretty painful process, and then you go, those people will hate you, then you will have to go to investigators through the whole process, and then the court. So nevertheless, that problem has been very indicative of what's happening in Ukraine and how much we need to change, how much faster we need to change our laws, our practices, how much more open we have to be in accordance with the requirements that the European Union has. So that's my best answer for now. We need to move through that process quickly. The issue of mobilization restrictions that we have on men, it's a highly debated issue. It's internal Ukrainian issue, and of course here you have the military that would like to lock in as many able men as possible, and the economy of course requires that we open up and provide the opportunities for those who can deliver by working abroad or by developing businesses abroad. So here, we're moving there. We just recently we've adopted legislation, changes to legislation, where the reasons for letting people out are a lot broader. But of course, there's a process that we need to agree with the military, and they are, you know, whatever they say, we try to do now. We want to keep them happy. That's my answer to that.
Thank you, Vadym. So Paweł and Adrian, your final answers and then closing remarks.
Closing remarks. 3 remarks. First, our role as parliaments towards governments to ask about sanctions, to push the parliaments. The second one, the role of the Western parliaments as creators of trends, as a trendsetter in concerning question of tribunals, or the recognizing Russia as a terrorist country, etc., etc. And third point, it's our duty as parliamentarians, as opinion leaders, to condemn, to inform, and it's an answer for one of questions, to give personal example, to be integral, to make our personal sanctions, to not invite to our homes, to the meetings, Russians who are not ready to condemn Putin. Our role is not only cheer up, to fight. Our role is not only to mobilize. Our role in 22nd century, it's also be integral, to give individual example, to give personal testimony. It's our role as a Polish, Hungarian, and also Ukrainian parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Adrian, your final, are you with us?
Of course.
Of course. Or you went for dinner?
Of course.
Okay, sorry.
I would agree with the fact that the main challenge of the parliamentary groups across the Europe and in our countries, in Moldova and Ukraine now, is to maintain above all and beyond all the challenges that we are facing in our communication, in our relationship, is to maintain the political understanding that Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia must belong and is a part of the free world. And that understanding should be the primary element that defines the cooperation and integration process between our countries and European Union. Because if to focus on problems and challenges, we will always find some problems and challenges to rely, not to rely on, but to get them as arguments. But if there is a political understanding that Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia must be offered a shot on the European integration, it should happen, and the parliaments are the primary actors to do that, to maintain a political commitment towards keeping our part of the world free and part of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, trendsetters, agenda shapers, solution makers. So, but the most important, I think, representatives of the people. So, and I think your example of serving the people with sacrifice, I think this is the best way also to educate people, that people who voted for you will never say, oh, I did a mistake. So actually, I think it's really important to change from your community, your constituency, to globally, from local to planetary level, because really, I do believe that Ukraine's victory is not just about Central or European continent, it's much wider. And I'm really very thankful to speakers of this panel for sharing your experience, your thoughts. your beliefs, and I wish also all of us to continue interparliamentary cooperation to strengthen our nations and to help Ukraine to win faster, because authoritarian regimes, they are very proactively supporting with weapons, kamikaze drones and others. So I think democracies should learn how to fuel each other with weapons first, tougher sanctions, and of course creative ideas how to punish totalitarian regimes. So thank you so much, and thank you Prisma for having this forum.